How do you destroy a superpower? Do you defeat its armies on the battlefield? Or do you make the world believe it was never a superpower at all, but a nest of heretics, criminals, and monsters? Tonight, we travel back to the dawn of the 14th century, to a world of knights and kings. We will feel the chill of a Parisian autumn in the year 1307. And as our story unfolds, please feel free to let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It is always a wonder to see how far these stories travel. Now, let us get comfortable. And if you enjoy our journey, a simple like or subscription lets me know you are out there. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, in Bedtime History, we witness the end of an era. But before the end, there was power, unimaginable power. And for a knight of the temple, that power was as real as the stone walls of our commandery. To truly understand that power and the world it built, we must listen to a voice from the past, a voice from within the order, speaking from the great Paris temple itself. My name is not important. I am a brother of the order, a servant of God. For 30 years, I have worn this white mantle, marked with the red cross of our martyrdom. My shoulders have grown accustomed to its weight, a weight of duty and of history. From my office within the great Paris temple, I have watched the currents of Christendom flow. I have seen kings rise and merchants fall, and through it all, our order endured. We were the pillars of the world, the order of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, a humble name for a global power. We were founded nearly 200 years ago, in the year 1119. A small band of knights sworn to protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. Now, in this year of our Lord, 1307, that small band has become an empire of faith and finance. Our foundations are sunk deep into the soil of every Christian kingdom. We hold more than 850 commanderies, from the misty shores of England to the sun-baked plains of Aragon. Each one is a fortress of faith and a center of commerce, a node in a vast, interconnected network that spans the known world. And here, in Paris, lies the heart. The Paris Temple is more than a castle. It is a city within a city, a sovereign power on French soil. Its high walls cast a long shadow over the bustling streets of the capital. Within these walls, we do not merely train for war. We manage the wealth of a continent. Kings and popes, dukes and bishops, they all entrust their fortunes to us. The royal treasury of France itself is housed within our vaults. I often walk through the treasury, a quiet, guarded place deep in the earth. The air is cool and still, smelling faintly of metal and old wood. Here, you can hear the sound of power. It is the soft clinking of coins, as brothers count the day's deposits. Gold florins from Italy, silver deniers from France, Byzantine solidi from the East. A river of wealth flowing through our hands. But our innovation was not simply in storing wealth, it was in moving it. We created a system, a work of genius born from necessity. A pilgrim in London could deposit his funds with our brothers there. He would receive a letter of credit, a simple piece of parchment with our seal and a cipher. He could then travel across Europe, unburdened by heavy gold, and present that letter in Jerusalem to receive his funds. We made the world safer. We built the foundations of modern banking, all in the service of God. This financial power gave us a unique standing. We were answerable to no king, no bishop, no local lord. Our allegiance was sworn directly and only to the Pope in Rome. This autonomy was our greatest strength. It allowed us to operate across borders, to negotiate with kings as equals, and to build our network without interference. We were a truly international body, a state without a state, bound by oath and faith. Of course, our purpose was not forgotten. We were soldiers of Christ. Our knights were the finest heavy cavalry in the world, the tip of the spear in the Holy Land. I remember the stories from the old brothers, tales of battles at Montcassard and Arsuf, tales of charges that broke the Saracen lines, a tide of white mantles and red crosses crashing into the enemy. Though we lost Acre, the last Crusader stronghold, some 16 years ago, our strength has not diminished. In fact, it has grown. They carry spices from the east, wool from England, and wine from our own vineyards in Cyprus. Our mission in Europe adapted. We became the guardians of Christendom's wealth, its administrators, its bankers. The life of a brother is one of discipline and of prayer. We wake before the dawn, and our day is structured by the ringing of chapel bells. But within this structure is a world of activity. In the scriptorium, the air is thick with the scent of beeswax candles and aging parchment. Brothers sit hunched over desks, their quills scratching as they copy manuscripts or update the ledgers that track our vast assets. Outside, in the main courtyard, the sound is different. Here you see the martial heart of the order. Young squires practice their swordplay, the clash of steel ringing in the crisp air. Sergeants, our veteran professional soldiers, stand guard upon the walls. Their armor gleams in the sun, their faces stern and watchful. They patrol these walls day and night, a constant, visible reminder of our strength. When I stand on those same walls, I can hear the distant sounds of Paris, the calls of merchants in the market, the hammering of a blacksmith, the laughter of children. It all seems very far away. We are a world apart, separate and secure. I pull my heavy woolen mantle tighter around my shoulders. It is a comfort, a symbol of our unshakable place in the world. Our pride in our mission and our stability feels as permanent as the stars. Yet, from this high vantage, I often look toward the Palais de la, the seat of the French king. We serve him faithfully. We guard his treasury. We are his bankers. But he is also a man in our debt, and that is a dangerous position for any king. We are a power he does not control, and I have learned that kings, especially this king, do not tolerate powers they cannot control. The man who sits on the throne of France is Philip IV. They call him Philip the Fair for his handsome features, but those who know him well, those who have met his cold blue gaze, they call him the Iron King. He is a man of profound piety and even more profound ambition. He believes he was chosen by God not merely to rule France, but to be the secular sword of all Christendom. His reign, which began in 1285, has been one of constant, grinding warfare. His long and costly struggles against the English and the Flemish cities have bled the royal coffers dry. He has an insatiable need for money, a hunger that drives all his policy and all his actions. We, in the temple, know this better than anyone. We see the state of his finances, we manage his debts, and we have seen the lengths he will go to fill his treasury. He is a king who views his kingdom as a resource to be squeezed until the last drop is extracted. In the year 1306, just last year, he expelled all the Jews from France. He seized their property, their businesses, and their loans. Before that, it was the Lombard bankers who felt his wrath, their assets confiscated to fund his wars. He even dares to manipulate the very money of the realm. He has repeatedly debased the currency, mixing the silver and gold with cheaper metals. The merchants complain, the people suffer. The new coins feel lighter in the hand, a tangible sign of the king's desperation. It has earned him a bitter nickname among his own subjects. They call him the false coiner king. His ambition is not limited to finance. It extends to the spiritual heart of Europe itself. For years, he was locked in a bitter power struggle with Pope Boniface VIII. It was a clash between two iron wills, a king who believed in his divine right to rule, and a pope who believed in the ultimate authority of the church. Philip did the unthinkable. He had the pope captured and humiliated. Boniface died shortly after, a broken man. That conflict changed everything. The papacy is no longer in Rome. It has been moved to Avignon, a city in France. The new pope, Clement V, is a Frenchman, a man who owes his position to King Philip. The spiritual authority of the Holy See is now under the shadow of the French crown. Philip has bent the church to his will. He is a patient, calculating man. He works through his ministers, clever lawyers who can twist the law to serve any purpose. His chief instrument is a man named Guillaume de Nogaret, a ruthless, cunning individual whose loyalty to the king is absolute. It was Nogaret who orchestrated the downfall of Pope Boniface, a man who does not shrink from any task, no matter how dark. Philip and Nogaret share a vision of a centralized, all-powerful French state with the king as its absolute master. In this vision, there is no room for an independent power, no room for a state within a state, and that is how they see our order. They see our wealth, our autonomy, our allegiance to a distant pope, and they do not see an ally, they see a threat. I remember a few years ago, there were riots in Paris. The people were furious about another debasement of the currency. The city was unsafe, even for the king. And where did Philip seek refuge? He came here to the temple. We gave him sanctuary behind our strong walls. He walked through our halls. He saw our treasury firsthand. He witnessed the scale of our operation. I believe that day, as he looked upon our strength and wealth, a seed was planted in his mind. Not a seed of gratitude, but one of envy and of cold calculation. The ambition of the Iron King is a force of nature. It is methodical, relentless, and unforgiving. It is given legal shape and a sharp, cruel edge by men like Guillaume de Nogaret. And in the smoky, candlelit chambers of the royal palace, these men began their work. They began to weave a web of whispers, designed to ensnare and destroy the most powerful order in Christendom. The campaign began in shadows. It was a quiet, patient affair, orchestrated by Nogaret himself. He had experience in these matters. He had used the same techniques of slander and propaganda to destroy Pope Boniface. Now he turned his sights upon us. He knew he could not challenge us on the battlefield. Our knights were too strong, our fortresses too secure. So he chose a different weapon. He chose lies. His first move was to find a voice for these lies. He found it in a man named Esquiu de Floyan, a bitter, disgruntled man who had once been a Templar, but was expelled from the order. He was a man with a grievance, and Nogaret knew how to exploit such men. He promised him gold, and perhaps revenge. In return, Florin began to tell stories. Vile, unbelievable stories. These whispers were carefully collected by Nogaret's agents. They sought out other former Templars, men who had been dismissed for theft or for breaking their vows. They were offered pardons and rewards in exchange for testimony. A scribe would sit in a quiet room, his quill scratching on vellum, taking down these false confessions. A word here, a phrase there, all of it twisted into a monstrous narrative. The accusations they crafted were designed for maximum shock. They had to be so terrible, so heretical, that they would overwhelm our centuries of good service. They settled on a trinity of evils: heresy, sodomy, and idol worship. They claimed that during our secret initiation ceremonies, new brothers were forced to deny Jesus Christ. They were forced to spit upon the cross. This was the central charge, the poison dart aimed at the heart of our identity as soldiers of Christ. It was a brilliant and diabolical invention. They added other lurid details, tales of obscene kisses, and stories of a mysterious idol, a severed head that we supposedly worshipped in secret. They gave it a name, a strange and foreign-sounding name, Baphomet, a name no one had ever heard before, likely a complete fabrication. While his agents gathered these testimonies, Nogaret planned the logistics. This would not be a slow legal process. It would be a single, decisive strike. A masterpiece of military coordination. Secret orders were drafted in the royal chancery. The smell of melting wax would have filled the air as each document was sealed with the king's authority. These orders were then sent by royal couriers galloping on the roads of France. They went to every royal seneschal and every bailiff in every corner of the kingdom. The instructions were precise. The sealed letters were not to be opened, not until a specific date and a specific time. On that chosen day, at the appointed hour, they were to act simultaneously. They were to arrest every Templar in France, every single one, from the highest commander to the lowest serving brother. The goal was to prevent any of us from escaping or from organizing a defense. To give this action a cloak of legitimacy, Philip needed the Church's cooperation. He used his influence over the French Pope to secure the reluctant support of the Inquisitor of France, a man named William of Paris. With the Inquisition involved, this would not look like a king seizing assets. It would look like a holy duty, a necessary cleansing of the faith. We, of course, knew nothing of this. Or rather, we heard things, but we did not understand their meaning. Rumors would reach us from the city. A merchant might mention a strange question asked by a royal official. A traveler might speak of royal messengers riding at unusual hours. I remember hearing whispers, vague and dismissible tales about our secret ceremonies. We treated them as we always had, as the petty jealousy of those who envied our wealth and our privilege. We had faced such rumors for 100 years. They were the price of our power. I felt no real fear. I felt secure, a little annoyed perhaps, but ultimately untouchable. There was a sense of being watched, a subtle paranoia in the air, but I dismissed it. It was unthinkable that the King of France, our charge and our debtor, would move against us. While this web was being woven in the dark corridors of the Louvre Palace for my brothers and me, life continued its steady, predictable rhythm. We were focused on our duties, our prayers, and our traditions. We managed our farms, audited our accounts, and planned for a future we believed was assured. We were living our final hours of peace, utterly unaware that the world was about to end. The day was Thursday, the 12th of October. The autumn air in Paris was growing colder, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The sun set early, casting long, deep shadows across the courtyard of the temple. It was a day like any other, a day of work and of prayer, a day of absolute, comforting normalcy. The storm was gathered just beyond the horizon, but our sky was clear. Our Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was here in Paris. He was an old man, our 23rd Grand Master, with a long and storied career in the service of the Order. He had recently returned from the Mediterranean. After discussions with Pope Clement, they had spoken of launching a new crusade, and of a possible merger between our order and our friendly rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. The future was on his mind. There was no reason for him to suspect anything. In fact, just the day before, he had stood beside the royal family. He had served as a pallbearer at the funeral for the king's sister-in-law. It was a great honor, a public display of the esteem in which the king supposedly held our order. We now know it was a deliberate and cruel act of deception, a final, friendly gesture before the blade fell. That evening, as the bells rang for vespers, we gathered in the stone chapel. The air was cool, the only light coming from the tall candles on the altar. Their flames danced, reflecting in the polished armor of the knights present. The sound of our chanting filled the high vaulted space. It was an ancient sound, a chorus of voices joined in prayer, just as our brothers had done for nearly 2 centuries. The Latin words were a comfort, a familiar anchor in a changing world. After prayers, we filed into the great hall for our communal dinner. Long wooden tables were arranged in rows. The meal was simple, as our monastic rule dictated: bread, some cheese, and a little wine. The warmth of the great fireplace at the end of the hall pushed back the evening's chill. The talk was quiet. A brother might discuss a report from a commandery in Spain, or the price of wool from our farms in England. The business of our order proceeding as always. I remember looking up at the great Templar banner, the Beauseant, hanging still in the smoky air of the hall. Its design was simple, black over white. It signified that we were fierce to our enemies, but fair to our friends. It was a symbol of our dual nature, monks and soldiers, bankers and protectors. I felt a deep sense of peace, of belonging. I was part of something vast and permanent. When the meal concluded, we gathered for Compline, the final prayers of the day. Then, a profound quiet settled over the fortress. The brothers retired to their chambers, simple cells with a hard bed and a crucifix on the wall. The guards on the walls changed shifts. The great gates were barred. The Paris Temple, one of the safest places in Christendom, settled into a deep and peaceful slumber. Unseen by us, thousands of the king's men were moving through the autumn night. They were taking up positions, not just around our walls in Paris, but outside every Templar property in the kingdom. Silently, they waited for the dawn. They waited for the signal to strike, a kingdom-wide net closing in on its sleeping prey. I went to my own chambers. I removed the heavy white mantle, the symbol of my power and my duty, and folded it carefully. I was a powerful man, a senior officer in a global institution. I was at peace with my world and with my God. I closed my eyes, completely unaware that the world I knew, the world I had served my entire life, would not exist when I awoke. I would never see that world again. The silence of that night was profound, a silence that held the entire kingdom. Have you ever experienced a quiet so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath? Sleep was a shallow thing, a dark ocean from which I was violently pulled, not by the gentle ringing of the matins bell, but by a sound of pure chaos, a sound that did not belong within these sacred walls. It was the crack of splitting timber, the crash of a heavy door torn from its iron hinges. Then came the shouting. My eyes opened to darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. For a moment, my mind refused to work. It was a nightmare. It had to be. The silence of the temple was absolute, a rule of our order. The only sounds should be prayer and the soft shuffle of sandaled feet. But the shouting grew louder, closer, angry commands, in harsh French. I rose from my simple cot, my mind racing. A riot. Had the Parisian mob broken through the gates? Or was it an attack by a rival lord bold enough to challenge the temple itself? I reached for the simple robe beside my bed. There was no time. The door to my own cell burst inward with a deafening crack. Torchlight flooded the small space. It blinded me. I could see only silhouettes, large shapes in steel helmets, crowding the doorway. They held swords and pikes. The light glinted off their polished metal. Cold air rushed into the room, carrying the smell of sweat and smoke. Before I could speak, they were on me. A rough hand seized my arm. The grip was like iron. Another hand grabbed my shoulder, forcing me to my knees. I was wearing only a simple sleeping tunic, utterly helpless. I tried to ask a question. Who are you? What is this madness? But the words caught in my throat. There was no room for questions in their brutal efficiency. They bound my wrists behind my back. The rope was coarse, and they pulled it tight enough to cut off the blood. I could feel the cold, rough steel of a soldier's gauntlet against my skin. They hauled me to my feet and pushed me out into the corridor. The sacred halls of our commandery were filled with noise and violence. Everywhere I looked, I saw the same scene. Brothers, my brothers, being dragged from their cells. Old men with gray hair and young novices barely past boyhood. All of them in their nightclothes, all of them bound and terrified. The shouts echoed in the stone passageways, a profane sound in this holy place. And then I saw the emblem on their shields. It was not the sigil of a rival noble. It was not the crude banner of a peasant mob. It was the fleur-de-lis, the golden lily of France, the emblem of the king. These were the king's men, the king we served, the king whose treasure we guarded. This realization was more shocking than the violence. It was a blow that struck deeper than any sword. This was not an attack. It was a betrayal. They herded us like cattle into the central courtyard. The pre-dawn air was bitingly cold on my exposed skin. I saw hundreds of my brothers, their faces pale and bewildered in the flickering torchlight. I saw our Grand Master, Jacques de Maul, his aged face a mask of disbelief. These were the soldiers of Christ, men of immense power and piety, reduced now to helpless prisoners in our own home. A royal official stood on the chapel steps, holding a scroll. He began to read. His voice was loud and clear, and devoid of any emotion. He spoke of a royal warrant, an order from the king. He spoke of crimes against God and against the realm. And then he said the word that turned our world to ash: heresy. The charge was heresy. As the first light of dawn broke over the city, the true scale of the operation became terrifyingly clear. The sun rose on a captured fortress, our fortress. I looked up at the main gate, at the place where our sacred banner, the Beauseant, had flown for 100 years. It was gone. In its place, the royal standard of France, the fleur-de-lis, flapped in the morning breeze. It was a flag of occupation. The cold stone of the courtyard floor seeped into my bare feet. The chapel bell, which should have been ringing for lauds, for morning prayers, was silent. That silence was the most chilling sound of all. It was the sound of our world ending. The rhythmic, predictable life of faith and duty had been shattered. The silence of God had replaced the music of our prayers. Through the gates, we could hear the sounds of the city waking up, and we could hear the sounds of the king's administration already at work. Wagons rumbled across the drawbridge, their heavy wheels groaning. They had come to haul away our treasures, the wealth of our order, the wealth of kings and popes entrusted to our care. Now it belonged to Philip. Royal officials, men in dark robes with grim, satisfied faces, moved through our halls. They carried ledgers and lists. I saw them in the treasury, in the scriptorium, in our armory. They were taking inventory. Every coin, every document, every sword and shield was being meticulously catalogued before being confiscated. This was not a raid. It was a systematic, methodical liquidation. News began to trickle in, brought by guards who spoke too loudly, or by the arrival of more prisoners. The story was the same everywhere, from the smallest farming preceptory in Provence to the mighty fortress commanderies in the south. At the same hour, before the sun had risen, the king's men had struck. All across the kingdom of France, thousands of us, knights, sergeants, chaplains, and servants, had been arrested in our beds. It was a net cast in secret and drawn tight at a single moment, an act of logistical coordination that was simply unprecedented. Philip's secret order, drafted a month earlier on September 14th, had been perfectly executed. The king's net had caught us all. There were no reports of organized resistance. How could there be? We were monks in our dormitories, taken completely by surprise by the very king we had served. Soon a new sound drifted over the walls, the voice of a royal preacher in a public square nearby. His words were amplified by the stone buildings, a public proclamation of our supposed crimes. I could hear the shock and outrage in his voice, a practiced performance for the stunned crowds. He spoke of heresy, of spitting on the cross, of obscene idols. He was painting a picture of monsters, justifying the king's actions to the common people. The propaganda campaign had begun as swiftly as the arrests themselves. They moved us from the courtyard then, down into the cold, damp dungeons beneath the temple. The air smelled of wet stone and despair. We were isolated, thrown into separate cells to prevent us from speaking to one another, from coordinating any kind of story. They took the keys to our archives, to our account books, to 2 centuries of our history. The king's men now held everything. They held our bodies. The physical imprisonment was terrifying, but it was nothing compared to the psychological assault that was about to begin. I sat in the darkness of my cell, the single word echoing in my mind. Heresy, a crime against God, an accusation so profound, so impossible, it defied all reason. I was taken for my first interrogation, and I would finally hear the devil's accusations in full. The room was small and windowless. The only light came from a single candle, which cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of fear. I was brought before a table. On one side sat 2 men, royal officials in dark, sober robes. They were not priests, they were not inquisitors, they were the king's lawyers, a clear breach of all jurisdictions. We were a religious order, answerable only to the church. One of the men unrolled a long piece of parchment. It was covered in neat, precise script. He began to read. His voice was a monotone, a droning instrument of psychological torture. He read the 127 articles of accusation that had been drawn up by Guillaume de Nogaret. He read them one by one. The first charge was the worst, that at our secret initiation ceremony we denied Jesus Christ as our Savior, that we declared him a false prophet. I felt a surge of pure, hot outrage. My entire life, my every breath, had been dedicated to the service of Christ. This was not just a lie. It was a blasphemy of the highest order. The voice droned on. He said that we were made to spit upon a crucifix, to trample it under our feet. My mind reeled. I tried to make sense of it. Was it possible they had twisted our rituals? Sometimes a new brother was asked to symbolically deny Christ with his lips, but not his heart, a test to prepare him for the torture he might face if captured by the Saracens, a lesson in the weakness of the flesh. Could they have taken that and turned it into this monstrosity? The list continued, each accusation more grotesque than the last. He spoke of obscene kisses, of being commanded to engage in acts of sodomy. The charge was designed to create revulsion, to paint us as decadent and corrupt. He spoke of our priests deliberately omitting the words of consecration during the Mass, rendering the Holy Sacrament meaningless. And he spoke of the idol, a mysterious head which he called Baphomet. He said we worshipped this head in our secret chapter meetings, that we believed it gave us wealth and made the trees flower. I had never seen such a thing. I had never heard the name. It was pure fantasy, a common accusation leveled against heretics to inflame the minds of the simple. They accused us of financial corruption, of secretly conspiring with the Saracens in the Holy Land. The list went on and on, a torrent of filth and lies. When he was finally finished, the room was silent. I looked at the men. Their eyes were empty of reason or empathy. They were not here to discover the truth. They were here to secure a confession. The second man pushed a document across the table. It was a written confession, and at the bottom I saw the signature of another knight, a man I knew, a man I had broken bread with the night before. His signature was shaky, a spider's crawl of ink. I felt a cold dread wash over me. The absurdity of the situation was melting away, and in its place, a deadly seriousness was taking hold. They told me that many of my brothers had already confessed. They said the Grand Master himself was ready to admit the order's guilt. It was another lie designed to break my spirit, to make me feel alone. I looked them in the eye, and I denied everything. I told them these were impossible slanders, lies concocted by our enemies. My voice was stronger than I expected. My faith was my shield. This was an attack not just on me or on my order. It was an assault on God himself, a perversion of justice carried out by a greedy king. And I knew with every fiber of my being that we would be vindicated. The Pope, our Holy Father, would not let this stand. He was our ultimate protector. Surely he would intervene. I clung to that hope. It was the only light in that suffocating room. Days turned into weeks. The world became the 4 stone walls of my cell. Time was marked only by the changing light that filtered through a small, barred window high above. My only connection to the outside world was the jailer who brought my daily meal, a bowl of thin soup and a piece of stale bread. I spent my hours in prayer, waiting for news, waiting for justice, waiting for word from Avignon. We all waited. Our hope rested on one man, Pope Clement V. He was a Frenchman, it was true, a man named Bertrand de Got, who owed his papal tiara to King Philip's influence, but he was still the Pope, the Vicar of Christ. He was the only authority on earth to whom our order answered. Philip's actions were a direct challenge to his power. We were certain he would react with fury, and at first he did. We heard whispers, passed from prisoner to prisoner through sympathetic guards. The Pope was outraged. He had written a sharp letter to King Philip, expressing his shock and anger. He condemned the king for overstepping his authority, for arresting the holy soldiers of the Church. For a brief time, our hope burned bright. The Holy Father was coming to our rescue. But King Philip was a master of politics. He knew the Pope's weaknesses. He responded not with apologies, but with pressure. He sent his agents to Avignon, and they carried with them the confessions, the pages of lies and coerced admissions that his interrogators had already gathered. They presented this evidence to the Pope, placing him in an impossible position. How could the head of the Church ignore such widespread, if fabricated, proof of heresy within a major religious order? Then Philip played his trump card, a threat of such magnitude it could shake the very foundations of the Church. He threatened to hold a posthumous trial of the former Pope, Boniface VIII, the same Pope that Philip had humiliated and broken. He would try him for heresy. It would be a colossal scandal, a crisis that could split Christendom. The message was clear: comply with me, or I will tear your house down. The Pope was trapped. He was a man of politics, not a man of iron will, and he was on French soil, vulnerable and exposed. He buckled under the pressure. In November, a month after our arrest, the news finally reached our prison. It was the sound of our last hope dying. Pope Clement had issued a papal bull, a formal decree sent to every Christian monarch in Europe. It was called Pastoralis. The bull did not condemn King Philip. It did not declare us innocent. Instead, it legitimized the king's actions. It ordered all Christian kings to arrest the Templars in their own lands and to seize their property in the name of the Church. The Pope had hoped to take control of the trials himself, to ensure a fair process. But by endorsing the arrests, he had validated the charges. He had abandoned us. I remember the day I heard the news, the crushing physical weight of it. He enjoyed my despair. The one person, the one office that I believed to be our ultimate protector had just sanctioned our destruction. What had begun as a French affair, a greedy king's power play, was now a church-sanctioned, Europe-wide persecution. We were no longer just the prisoners of King Philip. We were the accused heretics of Pope Clement. My hope, which had been a flickering candle in the darkness, was extinguished. It was replaced by a cold, hard despair. With the Pope's capitulation, the last chance of a swift resolution was gone. The king's men, the lawyers and officials, receded into the shadows, and new men came to take their place. Men with crueler eyes and sharper instruments. The trials were now handed over to the Inquisition. For my brothers, and for me, the true ordeal was about to begin. Imagine being utterly abandoned by the one person you believed was your ultimate protector. Share a thought in the comments if you've ever felt let down by an authority you trusted. The king's men were gone. In their place came the inquisitors. They were men of the church, but they did not bring the comfort of God. They brought the instruments of truth. In medieval law, a confession was the queen of proofs, the highest form of evidence. And torture, we soon learned, was a perfectly legitimate way to find it. I was taken from my cell and led deeper into the dungeons, down to a place where the air was thick and heavy. It smelled of old sweat and new fear. The room was not large. The stone walls seemed to drink the light from the single torch, leaving the corners in deep shadow. In the center of the room there were objects: a wooden frame with ropes, a brazier with glowing coals, simple, almost mundane things, instruments for a terrible kind of work. An inquisitor sat at a small table. He was a Dominican friar, his face placid and calm. Beside him, a scribe sat with ink and parchment, ready to record the proceedings. They were not angry men, they were bureaucrats of pain. Their work was methodical and dispassionate. This, I think, was the greatest horror: the complete absence of malice in the presence of such profound cruelty. They asked me questions, the same questions I had heard before. Did you deny Christ? Did you spit upon the cross? Tell us of the idol Baphomet. Tell us of the obscene rites. My voice was strong at first. I denied it all. I called upon God to witness my innocence. The inquisitor simply nodded, a patient look on his face. He made a small gesture to the men standing in the shadows. They bound my wrists. The rope was rough against my skin. They threw the other end over a pulley on the ceiling. This was the strapido. I had heard of it. A simple and effective way to dislocate a man's shoulders. As they pulled the rope and my feet left the floor, my denials became shouts. But the pain, a searing fire in my joints, soon stole my breath. It stole my reason. In that room, the world shrinks. It becomes nothing but the pain in your body and the calm, persistent voice of the inquisitor. He asks his questions again and again. He offers a way out. Just confess, he would say. Confess and be reconciled with the church. Confess and the pain will stop. All you have to do is say yes. I saw proud knights, men who had faced Saracen armies without flinching, utterly broken. I heard their screams in the night, muffled by the thick stone walls. I saw them afterward, their bodies twisted, their spirits crushed. In Paris alone, 36 of my brothers died during these interrogations. Their names were recorded neatly by the scribes, with a note that they had passed away during the application of the question. The confessions, when they came, all sounded the same. They followed a formula. The prisoners were not telling their own stories. They were simply repeating the answers that had been fed to them. Yes, I denied Christ. Yes, I spat on the cross. We were all giving them the exact words they needed to build their mountain of overwhelming evidence. My own psychological resistance, which had felt so strong, was eroded, worn away by pain, by hunger, and by the crushing despair of my abandonment. I held on for as long as I could, but in the end, my body betrayed my soul. I heard a voice, distant and broken, speaking the words the inquisitor wanted to hear. It was my own voice, I confessed, and the pain stopped. But as they carried my broken body back to my cell, a new kind of pain began. It was a spiritual agony, a shame so profound it felt like a physical weight. I had betrayed my God. I had betrayed my brothers. I had betrayed my sacred oath. I had done it in the hope of receiving absolution, a lighter penance. I did not yet understand that every confession was simply another nail in our coffin, and I soon learned that I was not alone in my fall. Even the strongest pillar of our order had cracked. The news came as a whisper in the dark. A rumor passed from cell to cell, a poison spreading through the prison. Jacques de Maul, our Grand Master, had confessed. The leader of our holy order, the 23rd successor to our founder, had admitted our guilt. The news was a crushing blow. It extinguished the last embers of resistance in many of our hearts. De Maul was an old man, perhaps in his 60s, a veteran of the wars in the Holy Land, a man of immense authority, but he was still a man, and they had broken him, just as they had broken so many of us. We later learned the details. In October of 1307, not long after our arrest, he was brought before the masters of the University of Paris. Under duress, under the terrible threat of torture, he had confessed. It was a partial confession. He admitted to the irregular ceremony. He admitted to the denial of Christ. But he vehemently denied the more lurid charges of sodomy and idol worship. It did not matter. For King Philip, this partial admission was a massive propaganda victory. The Grand Master himself had confirmed the core of the heresy charge. The king's campaign was vindicated. De Maul, in his shame and confusion, later claimed he only confessed to save himself from the pain. In a moment of profound weakness, he even wrote a letter to the other Templars. He urged us to confess as well. He likely believed this was the only way to save the order, that through submission and penance we might survive. It was a misguided and tragic calculation. That letter was used by the prosecutors with devastating effect. It broke the will of many knights who were still holding out. The psychological burden on our Grand Master must have been immense. To confess to the damnation of an entire religious order, an order you have sworn to lead and protect, it is a weight that would crush any soul. His confession shattered our unity. It left us demoralized and adrift. If our leader had fallen, if the very heart of the temple had surrendered, what hope was there for the rest of us? For a long time, the darkness in my cell felt complete and permanent. My own confession was a constant source of shame. The confession of my Grand Master was a source of profound spiritual despair. It seemed that the king had won. The order was broken. Its leaders had confessed. Its spirit was crushed. But as the Pope's own commissioners finally began their work, a small and entirely unexpected spark of defiance was kindled. In the year 1309, 2 years after our arrest, Pope Clement finally established his own commissions. They were to travel and hear the Templars' defense for themselves, away from the direct control of the king's men. A papal commission arrived in Paris, and one by one we were brought before them. The atmosphere was different here. These were princes of the church, not royal functionaries. There were no instruments of torture in the room. There was only a chance, a slim chance, to speak the truth, and something remarkable happened. The spirit of the temple, which we thought was dead, began to stir. Jacques de Maul was brought before the papal commission, and in a moment of stunning courage, he found his voice again. He stood before the cardinals, an old and broken man, but his words were strong. He dramatically recanted his earlier confession. He told them he had only spoken out of fear of torture. He said he was disgusted and ashamed of his weakness, and he proclaimed the complete innocence of the Holy Order. That single act of defiance lit a fire. Hundreds of other knights, emboldened by his example, followed his lead. When I was brought before the commission, I too found my courage. I recanted my confession. I told them of the torture, of the threats, of the leading questions. I saw the faces of the commissioners. There was surprise, and perhaps even sympathy. For the first time in 2 years, a flicker of hope returned. 2 of our brothers, a priest named Pierre de Boulogne and a knight named Renaud de Provence, emerged as brilliant leaders. They were skilled in the law, and they mounted a formidable defense of the order. They argued that any confession made under torture was legally invalid. They presented evidence of our orders, good works, our charity, our unwavering defense of Christendom. For months, in the year 1310, it seemed we might prevail. Nearly 600 Templars in Paris came forward to defend the order. We were united again. I would see my brothers in the halls, waiting to give testimony. We would share a glance, a silent promise of solidarity. A flicker of our old pride returned. We were not heretics. We were knights of the temple, and we would fight for our honor. This courageous defiance infuriated King Philip. He had thought the matter was settled. He could not allow the Papal Commission to unravel his carefully constructed case. He saw the proceedings slipping from his grasp, and so he decided to bypass the Pope's authority altogether. He responded with a move of such shocking brutality, it extinguished the flame of our resistance forever. King Philip found his instrument in the new Archbishop of Sens, a man named Philippe de Marigny, a man who owed his position entirely to the king. In May of 1310, Marigny convened his own provincial council. This council, loyal only to the king, had nothing to do with the papal commission that was hearing our defense. It moved with terrifying speed. The council selected 54 Templars. These were the leaders of our legal defense, the most vocal and articulate defenders of our innocence. Because they had recanted their original confessions, the council declared them to be relapsed heretics. Under the laws of the Inquisition, the punishment for a relapsed heretic was death. There was no appeal. They were taken to a field near the Porte Saint-Antoine, just outside the city walls. They were tied to stakes, and they were burned. The execution was carried out slowly to maximize their suffering, and to maximize the psychological terror it would inflict upon the rest of us. We heard the news in our cells. We could smell the acrid smoke as it drifted over the city. The chronicles say they went to their deaths with incredible bravery, proclaiming the innocence of the order with their last breaths. But their courage could not save them, and it could not save us. That mass execution destroyed our defense. It shattered our will to fight. The message was clear. If you recant your confession, you will burn. The remaining knights, terrified into submission, reconfirmed their original, coerced confessions. The flicker of defiance was gone. The end came slowly after that. The Pope, seeing the futility of it all, officially dissolved our order in 1312. Not because we were proven guilty, but because, he said, the order was now too controversial to continue. Our property was to be given to the Knights Hospitaller, though King Philip kept the lion's share for himself. The final act of our tragedy took place 2 years later, on the 18th of March, 1314. Jacques de Maule and another great leader, Geoffroy de Charny, were brought onto a public scaffold. It was set up in the plaza before the Cathedral of Notre Dame. They were brought there to hear their final sentence, perpetual imprisonment. But as the cardinal read the sentence, something inside our Grand Master broke free. He was done with submission. In a final, desperate act of defiance, he interrupted the proceedings. His voice, old and frail, rang out across the square. He declared that his confession had been a lie, that the order was pure and holy, and that he was ready to die for it. Geoffroy de Charny shouted his agreement. King Philip, who was present, was enraged. He made his decision on the spot. They were relapsed heretics. They would burn. That very evening they were taken to a small island in the middle of the river Seine. A pyre had been built. As the sun set over Paris, the flames were lit. We could see the fire from our prison windows, a terrible orange glow against the twilight sky. And so the flames took our Grand Master. His final words were not a curse, but a prayer. He died a night as we all had tried to live. Our wealth was seized, our name erased, our brothers scattered to the winds or the grave. The great order was no more, and in the silence that followed, a new kind of power, colder and more methodical, settled over the world. Thank you for staying with our Templar brother on his final journey. The main story is now over, but for those still awake, our scholarly reflection is about to begin. If you're feeling sleepy, I wish you a peaceful night's rest. Our story of the Templar brother, a story of faith and power, of betrayal and fire, has come to its end, a space of quiet, scholarly reflection. Here, in this epilogue, we will not ask what happened, but why. We will gently deconstruct the machinery of this great historical tragedy. The pace will be slow, and the tone will be soothing. This is an analysis designed not to startle, but to settle the mind. Let us calmly explore the anatomy of this remarkable and brutal takedown. Let us consider the matter of a king's ransom. For more than a century before their fall, the Knights Templar had served as the trusted financial agents of the French crown. The Capetian dynasty of kings relied upon the order's integrity, their security, and their unmatched international network. The Paris Temple was not merely a fortress. It was, for all practical purposes, the royal treasury. It was the central bank of the most powerful kingdom in Christendom. State revenues were deposited in its vaults. Royal accounts were managed by Templar clerks. The relationship was deep and symbiotic. But the king who reigned in 1307, Philip IV, was a man of expensive habits. Not habits of personal luxury, but of state-building and of war. His long, grinding conflicts with King Edward of England and his costly campaigns to subdue the wealthy cities of Flanders. The order represented the single largest concentration of liquid wealth and property in his kingdom. And crucially, it was a power he did not control. Seizing the Templar assets offered an immediate and massive injection of capital into his empty royal coffers. It was a brutally simple answer to a complex economic problem. The seizure itself was a masterpiece of bureaucratic efficiency. On that fateful Friday in October, the king's men did not simply arrest the knights. They seized everything. They confiscated vast tracts of fertile land, dotted with farms and villages that generated steady revenue. They captured castles and commanderies, strategic assets that strengthened the king's grip on his own realm. And of course, they took the cash, the gold and silver bullion, the precious metals stored in the temple's legendary vaults. One can almost imagine the scene. A royal accountant, seated at a desk, opening a heavy Templar account book. Its pages are filled with the wealth of a kingdom, a testament to 2 centuries of careful management. With a simple stroke of his pen, he crosses out the enormous debts the crown owes to the order. In an instant, the king's own financial slate is wiped clean. This was not just a seizure of assets. It was the largest act of sovereign debt cancellation in medieval history, achieved through brute force. He collected the rents from their farms, profited from their vineyards, and used their cash to fund his government. He bled the assets dry before handing over the depleted remnants to the Hospitallers years later. This was not an isolated act of desperation. It was part of a clear and ruthless pattern of behavior. Philip was a predator of finance. In 1306, just 1 year before the attack on the Templars, he had arrested and expelled all the Jews in France, seizing their property and their loan books. Before them, it was the Lombard bankers, Italian financiers, who had also been stripped of their assets and driven out. The Templars were simply the last, the largest, and the final independent financial power left standing in his kingdom. To a king bent on absolute control, they were an intolerable anomaly. The detailed inventories that the king's men created in the days after the arrests survive to this day. It was a cold, calculated, bureaucratic absorption of one great entity by another. The economic shock of this move was profound. The sudden removal of Europe's most important international bank disrupted trade and finance across the continent for years. It was a brutal but effective consolidation of economic power into the hands of the nascent modern state. This was achieved through a remarkably sophisticated tool, a state-sponsored propaganda campaign orchestrated by his chief minister, Guillaume de Nogaret was a master of this dark art. He had honed his techniques years earlier during the king's bitter struggle with Pope Boniface VIII. In that conflict, Nogaret had successfully painted the Pope himself as a heretic, an immoral monster unfit for office. He used rumor, slander, and carefully crafted legal arguments to destroy the Pope's reputation before orchestrating his capture. Now, he applied these same methods to the Knights Templar. The campaign began at the very moment of the arrests. Royal agents and preachers, armed with scripts prepared in Paris, were deployed to every major town in France. They went to the public squares and to the pulpits of the churches, places where people gathered and where information was shared. They read the king's charges aloud, their voices filled with a practiced, righteous indignation. The fear of heresy, of sacrilege, of secret societies that operated in the dark. The accusations of denying Christ, of spitting on the cross, of worshipping a demonic head. These were not meant to be debated. They were meant to horrify and to silence any opposition. The Templars' greatest strength, their secrecy, now became their greatest weakness. And into that vacuum Nogaret and his agents could pour any fiction they wished. They could invent monstrous rituals and obscene oaths, and there was no one outside the order who could definitively say it was not true. It was the perfect Achilles heel. A key tool in this campaign was the circulation of the coerced confessions. Once the inquisitors, using torture, had extracted admissions of guilt, these documents were copied and distributed. They were read aloud to the public. Here was proof, written proof, from the Templars' own mouths. It did not matter that the words had been produced through agony. In a society that revered the written word, a signed confession was seen as irrefutable. The campaign was also bolstered by Philip's own reputation. He had carefully cultivated an image of himself as a deeply pious king, the Rex Christianissimus, the most Christian king of France. This image gave a powerful credibility to his actions. If such a devout ruler was moved to act against a religious order, the people reasoned then the Order's crimes must be truly terrible. What we see here is one of the first and most successful examples of a state using centralized communication to systematically destroy an internal enemy. The campaign brilliantly reframed the entire event. This was not a financial seizure. It was a necessary and painful act of faith, a cleansing of the temple. The propaganda was so effective, so pervasive, that it not only justified the king's actions in the moment, but it also planted the seeds for the many myths and legends about the Templars that endure to this day. It is a sobering and very modern lesson in the power of narrative control, and how the tool of fake news is not a new invention, but a very old instrument of power. The propaganda dealt with their reputation, and the arrests dealt with their bodies. But the enduring question, the one that has fueled speculation for 700 years, is the question of their treasure. While the king's men seized a vast fortune, the legends tell of an even greater treasure that got away. Let us now calmly address the myths and the realities of the missing fleet and the paper trail. The story of the Templar treasure is one of the most romantic in all of history. It speaks of a vast hoard of gold and silver, perhaps even sacred relics like the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant. The most popular version of the myth involves the Templar fleet, which was based at the Atlantic port of La Rochelle. The story goes that on the eve of the arrests, the fleet secretly set sail, laden with the Order's legendary treasure, and vanished into the mists of history. From there, the theories branch out. Did they sail to Scotland to aid Robert the Bruce? Did they cross the Atlantic a century before Columbus and bury their treasure on Oak Island in Nova Scotia? These are wonderful stories. They are compelling, and they feed our desire for mystery. But the historical reality, as is often the case, is both less romantic and far more complex. The true treasure of the Knights Templar was not a single chest of gold. It was something far greater. It was their network, their vast portfolio of land, farms, castles, vineyards, and their sophisticated financial infrastructure. Their wealth was in deeds and in account books. It was a paper trail. And the hard truth is that most of this paper trail and the physical assets it represented was successfully seized by King Philip's men in France. Their meticulous inventories show that they captured the heart of the Order's financial power. But what about the fleet? It certainly existed. The Templars were a major shipping power, but there is no reliable contemporary evidence that it escaped en masse. A few ships may have slipped away, but the idea of the entire fleet vanishing with a great treasure is, most likely, a romantic invention of later centuries. So what did happen to the wealth? The papal decree, titled Ad Providum, was clear. All Templar property across Europe was to be transferred to the Knights Hospitaller. In theory, one military order was simply to absorb the assets of another. But in practice, the process was long, messy, and incomplete. Kings like Philip of France and Edward II of England were in no hurry to hand over the assets they now controlled. They held on to the properties for years, collecting the revenues and treating the lands as their own. When the properties were eventually handed over to the Hospitallers, they were often in a state of disrepair, their treasuries emptied, and their lands burdened with new taxes. In some places, powerful local nobles simply absorbed Templar farms and castles into their own domains, and there was little the Hospitallers could do about it. The great wealth of the Templars was not spirited away to a secret island. It was slowly and bureaucratically carved up and absorbed by the ruling powers of Europe. The idea of a single, hidden hoard of gold persists, because it is a more satisfying story than the complex reality of a legal and administrative absorption. We want to believe in the treasure map, in the secret vault. But the real treasure, the machinery of their international banking system, was shattered, and its component parts were simply recycled into the economies of the kingdoms where they lay. The paper trail, the dusty archives filled with deeds and property records, tells a less exciting, but more truthful story. For 7 centuries, the story of the Knights Templar seemed sealed. But history is not always a closed book. Sometimes, a lost document can come to light, and a new chapter can be written. In the quiet of the Vatican archives, at the dawn of the 21st century, just such a discovery was made. It added a final and poignant twist to the tale. This is the story of the Chinen parchment. In the year 2001, a historian named Dr. Barbara Frail was working deep within the Vatican's secret archives. It is a place of immense history, a labyrinth of shelves containing centuries of papal records. While cataloging documents, she stumbled upon a piece of parchment that had been misfiled for hundreds of years. It was the detailed record of a secret PayPal investigation. An investigation into the leaders of the Knights Templar, held at the castle of Chinen in the year 1308. This document, now known as the Chinen parchment, is remarkable. It reveals what happened when the leaders of the order, including the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, were questioned not by King Philip's torturers, but by the Pope's own trusted agents. Away from the threat of the rack and the fire, the knights told a very different story. According to the parchment, Jacques de Molay and the others testified before the papal agents. They admitted that the initiation ceremony of the order had become flawed. They confessed that it included a ritual in which new recruits were asked to deny Christ and spit near, though not on, the cross. They explained it as a misguided test of obedience, a simulation of the humiliation a knight might face if captured. They asked the Pope for absolution, for forgiveness for these sins, and for the weakness they had shown in confessing under torture. And here is the crucial revelation of the Chinen parchment. After hearing these testimonies, the Pope's agents, and Pope Clement V himself, granted the Templar leaders absolution. They formally forgave them. This is a stunning historical reversal. It proves that the Pope knew, as early as 1308, that the leaders of the Templars were not heretics. He knew their confessions had been coerced. He knew the core of the king's case was a lie, and yet he did not save them. The parchment reveals Pope Clement not as a malicious accomplice to the king, but as a weak and politically trapped figure. He knew the Templars were innocent of the main charge, but he was too afraid of King Philip to act on that knowledge. He feared that if he defended the Templars, Philip would make good on his threat to charge the former Pope Boniface with heresy, an act that could have triggered a catastrophic schism in the church. And so, Clement made a cold, political calculation. He chose to sacrifice the Knights Templar, to dissolve their order for the supposed good of the church, in order to maintain a fragile political stability. The discovery of this lost document completely changes our understanding of the Pope's role in this tragedy. It provides a final historical vindication for Jacques de Molay and his knights. It confirms that their final, defiant proclamations of innocence from the flames of the pyre were, in fact, the truth. The knights were not demons, but men, trapped in the gears of a machine they could no longer control. Thank you for joining this scholarly reflection. For those still with me, we have one final part, a gentle exploration of the ripples the Templars left behind. For all others, may your sleep be deep and your dreams peaceful. The pyre has cooled, the voices are silent. Our journey through the dramatic rise and fall of the Knights Templar is complete. And now, as the main story recedes like a distant dream, we enter a final, gentle space. This is a place for quiet contemplation, for exploring the soft echoes left behind in the stones of history. There is no more tension, no more tragedy. The pace is slow, the subjects are calm. This is bonus content, designed as a peaceful companion for the last moments before sleep. Think of these as gentle footnotes to a finished tale offered in a soft voice. Let us begin this final, soothing exploration. Our first reflection is on the great rivals of the Templars, the other powerful order of holy knights who often fought beside them, and who would ultimately become their designated heirs. Let us tell the calm story of the Knights Hospitaller. Their story begins even before the Templars. Their official name was the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, and their name reveals their purpose. They were founded not as soldiers, but as healers. Their origins lie in a hospital established in Jerusalem in the 11th century to care for the sick and the poor, for any pilgrim of any faith who had made the long and difficult journey to the holy city. One can imagine the atmosphere of that place, a haven of calm in a turbulent world. The air would have smelled of medicinal herbs, of lavender and rosemary, used to soothe fevers and heal wounds. The brothers of the hospital would move with a quiet purpose, tending to the weak, offering food and water and a safe place to rest. Their mission was one of pure charity, a mission of care that earned them respect throughout Christendom. Like the Templars, the Hospitallers were swept up by the currents of the Crusades. The need to protect their hospitals and the pilgrims they served led them to take up arms. They too became a formidable military power. Their knights, clad in black mantles with a distinctive white, 8-pointed cross, were renowned for their discipline and courage. They often fought alongside the Templars in the great battles for the Holy Land. They were rivals, yes, but they were also brothers in the same cause. When the Templars were dissolved by the Pope, it was the Hospitallers who were named the official inheritors of their vast estates. On paper, it was a transaction that would make them the single most powerful institution in Christendom. But the reality was far more difficult. This inheritance was a costly and complicated burden. Kings like Philip of France had already seized the best of the Templar lands. The Hospitallers had to engage in long legal battles and pay enormous fees to these kings just to claim the properties that were rightfully theirs. What they received was often a shadow of the former Templar wealth. But the Hospitallers were survivors. They adapted to the changing world. After being forced out of the Holy Land, they did something remarkable. They established their own sovereign state on the Greek island of Rhodes. For 200 years, from their mighty fortifications, they ruled the island and waged a naval war against pirates and the expanding Ottoman Empire. One can almost hear the gentle sound of the Mediterranean Sea lapping against the stone walls of their great harbor. The island of Rhodes became a bastion of Christendom in the east. When Rhodes finally fell to a massive Ottoman invasion in 1522, the Hospitallers moved again. They were given the island of Malta by the Holy Roman Emperor. There, they built the magnificent city of Valletta and continued their mission. They ruled Malta until 1798, when they were displaced by a new force in the world, Napoleon Bonaparte. Their survival, for so many centuries after the Templars vanished, may lie in their dual identity. The Templars had become known primarily as bankers and soldiers. The Hospitallers, however, never abandoned their original mission of healing. Their great hospitals in Rhodes and Malta were marvels of medieval medicine. This charitable reputation, this focus on caring for the sick, perhaps made them seem less of a political threat. It gave them a moral authority that was harder to challenge. And their story does not end there. In a quiet and remarkable way, it continues to this day. The sovereign military order of Malta still exists. It is recognized as a sovereign entity in international law, maintaining diplomatic relations with over 100 countries. It no longer has a territory, but it has not forgotten its purpose. It operates hospitals and ambulance corps and relief agencies around the world, continuing its 900-year-old mission of humanitarian work, a gentle and enduring echo of a crusading ideal. The fate of the Knights Templar was most brutal and most famous in France. The fires of Paris have captured the historical imagination for 7 centuries. But the order was a vast international body, and the edict for their arrest, issued by the Pope, was sent to every Christian king. So now, let us turn our gaze away from France and explore the gentler ends the order met in other lands. In England, the news of the Templar arrests was met with skepticism. King Edward II was Philip's brother-in-law, but he was also deeply in debt to the London Temple. His initial reaction was not to arrest the knights, but to write letters in their defense. He was only moved to act after intense and repeated pressure from the Pope. When the arrests in England did take place, they were carried out with a notable lack of enthusiasm. The process was slow and almost polite. More importantly, English law did not permit the use of torture in the same way that French law did. The interrogations were far less brutal, and without the use of torture, there were very few confessions. The English Templars were, for the most part, declared not guilty of heresy. They were not burned at the stake. They were allowed to retire, to live out their days peacefully in other monasteries, their welfare paid for by a pension from their former estates. One can imagine an old knight, his fighting days long over, quietly tending a garden in the peaceful grounds of an English abbey, a gentle and merciful end. In Spain, the situation was different again. The Spanish kingdoms of Aragon and Castile were still engaged in the Reconquista, the long, slow struggle to retake the Iberian Peninsula from the Moorish kingdoms. In this land, the Templars were not seen as shadowy international bankers. They were seen as vital, battle-hardened soldiers on the front line of a holy war. The Spanish kings were extremely reluctant to dissolve an order that was so crucial to their own military efforts. The trials held in Spain largely found the Templars to be innocent. Their assets were not simply seized by the crown. Instead, they were carefully transferred into new, local military orders, which continued the fight. But perhaps the most remarkable story comes from the Kingdom of Portugal. The Portuguese king, Denis Varste, had a close relationship with the Templars, who had been instrumental in the founding of his nation. He simply refused to persecute them. He initiated a nominal trial, largely for the benefit of the Pope, which quickly found the knights innocent of all charges. But King Denis knew the order could not continue under the tainted name of Templar. So he negotiated a clever solution with the Pope. The Knights Templar in Portugal would be dissolved, but a new order would be created. the Order of Christ, and all the Templar assets and personnel in Portugal would be transferred directly into this new organization. It was not an end, it was a rebranding. The Templars of Portugal did not fall, they simply changed their name. This new Order of Christ would go on to play a central role in one of the greatest chapters of human history, Portugal's Age of Discovery. It was the wealth and the maritime knowledge of the former Templars that helped fuel this exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator, the great patron of Portuguese discovery, was a grand master of the Order of Christ, and the ships that sailed under his command, the caravels that pushed out into the unknown Atlantic, did so with a familiar symbol on their great white sails, a bold red cross in the style of the old Templar cross. The legacy of the Templars, under a new name, was carried to the shores of Africa, India, and Brazil, a quiet and hopeful continuation of their story. These varied fates, these gentler ends, show us that the destruction of the Templars was not inevitable. It was a political project born of the specific circumstances in France. In lands where the king was not so desperate for money, or where the knights were still seen as valuable allies, the story had a much more peaceful conclusion. The historical order of the Knights Templar ended in fire or in quiet dissolution. But its story was only just beginning. The dramatic nature of its fall, combined with the secrecy that had always surrounded it, created a perfect void. And for 700 years, the human imagination has been filling that void with myths, with legends, and with conspiracy theories. Let us now drift gently into this world of romance and mystery. Let us contemplate the long shadow the Templars have cast. The most famous of these connections is to the secretive society of the Freemasons. Today, one of the highest orders a Freemason can attain is called the Knights Templar, but the historical connection is not what it may seem. The medieval Knights Templar had no connection to the craft guilds of stonemasons from which Freemasonry evolved. The link is a much later invention. In the 18th century, during a period of great interest in chivalry and ancient lore, Masonic orders began to adopt the names and symbols of the Templars. They were drawn to the story of a noble order, unjustly persecuted and destroyed. They created elaborate rituals and degrees based on the Templar legend. It was a romantic adoption of a powerful story, not a direct, unbroken lineage. There is no historical evidence that any medieval Templars survived to form or join the Freemasons. Yet the myth is a powerful one, a testament to the enduring appeal of a secret brotherhood. Another powerful myth is that of the Templars as the guardians of the Holy Grail. This idea, so popular in modern fiction, has its roots in 19th century Romantic literature. The Grail, the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper, was a potent symbol of lost, holy knowledge. The Templars, as a powerful and mysterious religious order with deep roots in Jerusalem, became the perfect candidates for its secret guardians. The story of their hidden treasure merged with the quest for this sacred relic. It is a beautiful and compelling tale, but it is a tale of fiction, not of history. The historical Templars were soldiers and bankers, not the guardians of a secret Christian bloodline or some esoteric, hidden knowledge. Their sudden, violent disappearance from the world stage was so shocking it seemed to demand a secret explanation, and their supposed secret knowledge and immense, lost wealth became a template for countless conspiracy theories. They are said to have discovered ancient secrets under the Temple of Solomon. They are said to be the hidden hand behind world events for centuries. These stories are a fascinating study in how we, as humans, create narratives to make sense of the past. The very propaganda used to destroy them has had its own strange and long afterlife. The Baphomet, the mysterious idol head the Templars were accused of worshipping, was almost certainly a complete fabrication by Nogarit's agents. Yet today, the name Baphomet is a staple of modern occultism. Its imagery used by groups who have no connection to the medieval knights. A 700-year-old lie has taken on a life of its own. Contemplating these myths should not be an exercise in judgment. We do not need to dismiss them as simply wrong. Instead, we can appreciate them in a gentler way, as a testament to the power of a good story. The history of the Templars is compelling, but the myths of the Templars are, perhaps, even more so. And in the quiet space between sleep and waking, we can appreciate the way history is transformed into legend, like a reflection in a dream. The myths are powerful, but they are intangible. They are whispers and shadows. But there are still some real, physical places in the world that hold the quiet echo of the Templars. Places where you can reach out and touch the stone that they touched. For our final thoughts, let us take a calm and peaceful journey to one such place. Let us pay a virtual visit to the Temple Church in London. Imagine yourself, for a moment, stepping away from the noise and hurry of the modern city. You pass through a narrow archway and find yourself in a quiet, secluded courtyard. The air is still. The sounds of traffic fade away, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves. Before you is a church unlike any other in London. It is low and round, built of ancient, honey-colored stone. This is the Temple Church, the English headquarters of the Knights Templar. It was consecrated in the year 1185. The world it was built for is long gone, but the church remains. We push open the heavy oak door and step inside. The first thing you notice is the shape. The main part of the church, the nave, is perfectly round. This was a deliberate design. It was built to evoke the shape of the most sacred church in Christendom, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is built over the site of Christ's tomb. Standing here, a knight could close his eyes and feel he was back in the Holy Land. The second thing you notice is the light. It filters down from tall, slender, stained glass windows. It illuminates the motes of dust hanging in the still air. It casts gentle pools of colored light onto the ancient flagstones. And in the center of this round space are the effigies. Lying on the floor are 9 life-sized carvings of knights sculpted from stone. They lie on their backs, their hands clasped in prayer. They are clad in the armor of the 13th century. Their faces are serene and peaceful. For centuries, people believed these were the tombs of Templar knights. But they are memorials, placed here to honor great knights and patrons of the order. They lie here still, resting for eternity, silent stone witnesses to all that has passed. Let us imagine walking slowly around them. The silence in the church is profound. It is a deep and reverent quiet, a true haven from the world outside. The acoustics in the round nave are famous. A single gentle choir note can hang in the air for what seems like an eternity, its pure sound filling the entire space. After the Templars were dissolved, this church passed through many hands, first to the Hospitallers, then to the Crown. Eventually, it became the church for London's 2 most famous legal colleges. It is now surrounded by the quiet, scholarly world of lawyers and judges. During the Second World War, the church was badly damaged by bombing, but it was carefully and lovingly restored, a testament to its enduring importance. To stand here, in the quiet of this ancient church, is to feel a tangible connection to the world we have been exploring. This is not a myth. It is not a story in a book. It is real stone, shaped by the hands of men who lived and prayed 900 years ago. It is a peaceful and powerful reminder of the great order that built it, a silent and beautiful final chord to our story. And here, in the quiet of this ancient church, our journey ends. The story of the Knights Templar is a reminder of how quickly worlds can change, how power can vanish, and how truth can sleep for centuries, only to be rediscovered. Thank you for spending this time with Sleeping Scribe. I hope this story has brought you some calm, some comfort, and perhaps some peace as you drift off. If you've enjoyed our time together, a subscription, a like, or a quiet comment is always deeply appreciated. It helps these stories find others who might need a peaceful place to rest. Until next time, sleep well. May your night be filled with gentle dreams and a deep, restorative peace. Good night.